Good afternoon, or hello, everyone, depending on where you're at in the country. It's afternoon for us here. My name is Josue Jimenez. I'm the Assistant Director of Admissions at Duke Law School, and really want to thank you first of all for stopping by and watching this video. We hope that it's helpful to you as you start the process of navigating the law school admissions world. We know it can be a very overwhelming process because there's a lot of information everywhere, and so we're adding more information out there, but hopefully it's helpful and it's clear. And the purpose of this is to give you the opportunity to hear it directly from admissions officers. And so we want to give you our perspectives because there is so much out there. And so really hope that this can help ease some of that stress and answer a lot of your questions that you may have, to really put yourself in the best position possible to maximize your opportunities and be admitted to the schools that you really want to get admitted to. And so with that, I'll go ahead and get started and introduce or have our speaker introduce themselves. So I'm joined today by Pilar Mensah. And Pilar, feel free to introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me. As he said, my name is Pilar Mensah, and I am the Assistant Dean of Admissions at the University of Houston Law Center, obviously located in Houston, Texas. I've been with the university a little over 12 years, the whole time actually in the admissions office. So I've seen a lot of change over the last 12 years. Definitely enjoy working with students and helping them with the process, hopefully answering their questions, alleviating their concerns, and ensuring that they feel confident this is something that they can do. And anyone can definitely, go to law school if you have the right mindset and you're ready to put in the work. I'm originally from Phoenix, Arizona, and I went to college at the University of San Diego. I went to law school at the University of Texas, so I've kind of bounced around a little bit between Texas, California, and Arizona, but this is definitely my home now. I've been here 14 years.
Nice, thank you.
Mhm.
Something I always like to ask as we get to know. So for those of you that don't know, law school admissions people, we know each other for the most part. We travel together a lot, usually by ourselves, so we really get to know each other over the years. And so, something I always like to ask colleagues, especially when I'm first meeting them, is why did you decide to get into law school admissions? Especially because a lot of us, went to law school, maybe practiced for a little bit, and then, had that moment of realizing I might want to take, this leap into this world that maybe we weren't thinking about in law school. But what made you decide, this is the path for me?
Right. So I think it was obviously numerous things. One was I did practice in Arizona for a few years. And when my husband and I decided to move to Texas, at that point, I needed to make the decision, did I want to continue practicing? Did I enjoy it? To the point where I was, wanting to take the bar again, because I would have needed to take the Texas bar. For me personally, I didn't particularly enjoy the adversarial nature of the profession, which is not true in all, legal professions, depending on where you go, but that was my experience. And so I had worked in human resources prior to law school. And I had also been very involved in the admissions office at my law school. So kind of those common interests, like working in human resources and assisting employees with issues, concerns, onboarding them into the organization was similar to the admissions world, but also having experienced it as a law student, getting to travel and meet with prospective students and give them advice. I knew I enjoyed that aspect of it. I also enjoy event planning, which you wouldn't necessarily think is a big part of law school admissions, but it really is. We do host and put on a lot of events for both prospective students and students that are admitted to our program. So I got to, collaborate several different interests in this role. And there's even a little bit of math if we look at a lot of stats and historical data. So that's interesting to me as well.
Yeah, no, I've definitely added event planner to my resume, so I
Mhm.
understand that. But yeah, no, it was very similar path as you when it came to me. Why I wanted to get into admissions was because in law school I was involved with a lot of panels, giving tours as a student, and I really enjoyed it. But at the time, I was like, I want to practice for at least a little bit. This is why I went to law school.
Right.
And as much as I actually enjoyed practice, I was in the nonprofit sector with Legal Aid of North Carolina. That's where I first started, and then I went to the to North Carolina Department of Public Safety, and I enjoyed it. But I just felt like I could have a bigger impact in the admissions world, just because, once you make it through law school, you realize as a first gen student, there's so many what things that could have made the process a lot easier if you would have just known. And so, because at the time when I was applying law school, there just weren't as many resources that I had access to. I thought as a way to be the resource for students that I wish I could have had when I was
Right.
going through this. So definitely, can relate to that, and that's why we're doing this. And so, for you, thinking back about when you were going through the law school application process and also like the experience that you've had, of course, now as a dean of admissions, for someone that's trying to decide, is this something that I want to pursue? Is the legal profession something that I want to be a part of? Because that's something that we emphasize to students, really take the time to think about. What is your advice or what do you recommend students do to try to figure out, is this the path for me?
Right. And I do think, the path is going to be different for every student. But I think in any, as you're considering any profession, the best thing that you can do is your research, right? And so I would say, think about the network in your life. Do you know any attorneys? Do your parents know any attorneys? And you can possibly, have conversations with them about what their days look like. What is their career like? So you can start getting an idea if it's something you'd be interested in. If you have an opportunity to do some sort of shadowing of an attorney, or even as formal as maybe some sort of legal internship while you're in college or even high school. Like I did some, work as a high school student, just as like answering the phone at a law firm, just to be in that environment and be in that space and see what it was like on a daily basis. I think another great resource too is any current law students that you may know, students that may be a couple of years older than you that have already graduated, that are in law school, that you can ask what their experience is like. What do they enjoy? What do they dislike? But I think that like doing that research just with the people that you know is really helpful. And then of course, if you have the opportunities to take any sort of like undergraduate courses that are related to the law, because a lot of undergraduate universities will have things like that, that will give you a taste as well to see. And then as you get closer, if you are still thinking that law school is the path for you, I would definitely visit law schools, sit in on mock classes. And like today, there's resources all over. There are a lot of different universities that offer pre-law programs in the summertime where you can have internships, you can learn about the legal profession, you can see what it's like to be a student, you can learn how to outline. And a lot of those programs are free or very inexpensive. But it gives you, again, an idea of whether or not you would like it. And I think that any experience is valuable, whether you determine that you don't enjoy it and it's not something you want to do, that's just as valuable as deciding, actually, you know what, I think I could see myself in this profession and be happy in it. And I think if you can do that and you can do that research and you can really solidify in your mind that this is what you want to do, it'll just help you all that more to be successful in law school because it is very challenging. So if you have a strong core that this is what you want, you can, kind of remember that and draw from that inspiration that you have on the days that law school is maybe a little more challenging than others and you feel like, I don't know if I can make it through this, remembering what your motivation is and knowing this is really what you want.
Yeah, no, definitely. And that's something that I'm glad to see, that there are so many more pre-law programs now than when I was applying to law school. And like you said, most of them are free. Some will give you stipends for completing the program as
Mhm.
well. To actually get paid to do those programs. So I would definitely, co-sign that, of looking at that. Well, I remember when I graduated from law school or from undergrad, and I was like, all right, law school is it for me. But then I thought about it and I was like, I don't actually know what a lawyer does on a day-to-day
Right.
basis because I didn't know any lawyers, and so
Right.
I emailed a bunch of. I knew I was interested in immigration law, so I looked up all the immigration attorneys in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is where I want to live at the time, and so emailed them all saying, do you have anything part-time, full-time? I think I emailed like 30
Mhm.
attorneys, and I got like two responses. One was
Mhm.
just like a no, which I appreciated, at least a no.
Right.
And the other ones were like, I might have something, let's talk. And out of
Mhm.
that came a part-time position where I learned so much, and it really confirmed for
Mhm.
me, yes, this is what I want to pursue.
Right.
But it also confirmed for me that workers' compensation law was not what I wanted to pursue. So I at least had a general idea of what I liked and didn't like when I got to law school. So now I definitely agree
Yeah.
when it comes to reaching out to attorneys as well as a good starting
Yeah.
point to really think of what this is and really see what does this look like on a day-to-day basis. Because lawyer always sounds great, but
Right.
you don't see it on a day-to-day basis.
And what you see on TV is
Yeah.
reality, so we don't want to base our decision off of a television show or a movie for sure.
Yeah, no,
Um,
definitely.
but
And
I
I think
had
go ahead.
sorry, I was say I had a similar experience. Same thing. I emailed a bunch of, or honestly, back then it was probably a physical letter. I sent out letters to a bunch of law firms in the Phoenix area, and initially got a bunch of no's, and then one responded to me months later saying, "Actually, you know what? Someone in the office is going on maternity leave. We'd love to have you come for 3 months." So hey, that was great. I took that, took that
Yeah.
opportunity.
Yeah, no, definitely. I was gonna say, talking about TV and movies, that's one, I guess, drawback to going to law school is like it's very difficult to watch
Mhm.
lawyer-based shows and movies without being like, that's not what that happens, or that's not what that
Right.
means. So,
And I know doctors feel the same way
yeah,
about the
exactly.
medical shows for sure. They're
Yeah, so
like,
everyone talks about how like Suits is a great show. Never seen it, have zero interest in watching it just because
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
like, I don't know how this portrays. I think the only legal movie that I watch is My Cousin Vinny, and that's the only
Oh, right,
one.
absolutely.
But yeah, but no, not once you've decided as an applicant or as a student, okay, law school, you thought about it, law school is for you, is the path that you want to do. What we recommend doing is, to get started is starting with lsac.org.
Mhm.
So Law School Admissions Council, they're the ones that pretty much organize everything when it comes to the application process. All the applications are completed through them. The LSAT, of course, which is the entrance exam that you have to take. Um, some schools accept the GRE, but we'll talk about that at a later time.
Right.
But the LSAT is the primary test that pretty much every school is going to take, and every ABA accredited law school is going to take. And so that's a good starting point there. And they
Right.
have a lot of great modules. They have the LSAC Law School Hub now as well, where you have a lot of resources there. They have LSAT prep course they partner with.
Mhm.
Um, Sorry, Khan Academy. I was blanking.
Right. Khan Academy,
Yeah,
absolutely.
there's so many prep courses now, but Khan Academy is who they partnered with. And so that's a good starting point, and it's free to really see,
Mhm.
where you're at, and then realize or figure out, do I need something more personal, like a prep course or a private tutor, and you can make that determination based on, what your learning style is in your budget. Like for me, for example, when I was going through this, I had no budget, so it was more so like, what can I get for free? And so at the
Mhm.
time, LSAT would give you a free practice book, um, and from that, I used that, and then I went to my local public library, and they had one LSAT prep book, and so I checked that out, and that was my LSAT prep. And so, but I don't know, Pilar, if that's something. How did you prep, and what do you
Yeah, I
recommend?
don't, I really don't think there were as many resources when I was applying for law school as there are now. There definitely wasn't Khan Academy or any sort of free prep course. So I did pay for an independent, like outside third party
Yeah.
course. But I took a break in between undergrad and law school. So I did work for a couple of years. So I was working at that point in
Mm,
time. It was still expensive, but I had an
yeah.
income, so I was able to take one of those prep courses because they were, they are and were expensive.
Yeah, no, but I mean, and that's something I tell students as well, all this is an investment. And so,
Mhm.
we'll talk about it later as well as part of the importance of the LSAT and admissions, but also financial aid. But, it might cost to do a prep course, but if it means you're getting a much higher score, it can have
Right.
a big payoff in financial
Right.
aid and scholarship amount as well.
Absolutely. And I think it's knowing yourself too. I know that I'm not the greatest standardized test taker.
Mhm.
And so I did take, I took a test just cold without studying, just to kind of see where my baseline is. And I think that can be helpful for students too. There's free old LSATs that you can take, and then you can score them and kind of see what your baseline is. And my baseline was extremely low. And so I felt like I will not get accepted to any law school with
Yeah.
this score. So I do need to put in, I need to invest in improving my score. But no matter what course you take, or if you do it self-study, or if you do an online course, I would say that what's most impactful, in my opinion, and what's going to increase the score isn't necessarily what you do in class. It's the work that you put in on your own, because you're going to have to take a lot of practice questions, do a lot of practice tests on your own the classes supplement that and teach you kind of tips and tricks on how to take the exam, but there's nothing that can replace the repetition of doing those practice questions over and over.
Mm,
So I definitely put a lot of time on my own, and then I would go to class, I think one evening a week, and Saturday, I think is what it was back then.
I got you. Yeah, no, definitely. And that's something that I also have to like think about incorporating and encourage students to think about as you're planning, how long you're giving yourself to apply is
Mhm,
incorporate, that or factor in that study time because that is part of
mhm.
the application process as well. And talking about the different pieces of the application, can you give us like a breakdown of what generally most schools are going to require and what all it entails or isn't included in the law school application?
Absolutely. So I'll try to be as general as possible. But I will say every law school is going to expect that you have earned a 4-year bachelor's degree.
Mhm.
So the major is not particularly important. Law school will accept students with all different backgrounds, all different majors, but you do have to have a 4-year degree from an accredited university. And then most are going to require some sort of entrance exam. The LSAT is the most common. I would say I think every ABA accredited law school accepts the LSAT as the entrance exam, and then some law schools will accept the GRE. So you need to do your research and determine which schools you're interested in applying to and decide if you're going to take the GRE or the LSAT. But the caveat with that is just take one of them. Do not take both the LSAT and the GRE. You just want to take one. If the schools you're interested in accept both and you're not sure which one you want to take, that might be a good opportunity, like I said, to just take a practice one. See how you do on the GRE cold, see how you do on the LSAT cold, and which one do you think you could most likely improve your score the most on and do the best on, is how I would say to go about that. And so then beyond those two things, most schools are going to require some sort of personal statement, which is a writing sample. It's something that you will write about yourself. Law schools will sometimes have a prompt or give you kind of a list of things that you could talk about in your personal statement, but it is an opportunity for the law school to get to know you. And I would say, think about it generally as your interview on paper. A lot of law schools do not have a formal, face-to-face interview process. It's very challenging with the volume of applications that we receive to be able to do face-to-face interviews. So it's like your interview on paper. So we want to learn about you, but of course you want to present yourself in a very positive light. But I'm sure we'll get into the nitty-gritty of that. And then beyond that, usually law schools are going to ask for some sort of resume. So they want to see what you've been doing, particularly in college. I wouldn't include anything on your resume that's high school related, but anything high school or beyond high school can be on your resume. So the law school admissions can see, what else have you been doing aside from going to school and getting your degree?
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, no, definitely. You talk about major and how law school doesn't require a major. That's something that I have personal experience with because I didn't know that when I was deciding what my major was going to be. I remember being at orientation in undergrad, and the orientation leader, when we were signing up for classes, they're like, "Well, what do you want to major in?" And I was like, "I don't know, but I know I want to go to law school."
Mm.
And they were a junior at the time, and they're like, "Oh, well, I'm gonna go to law school too, and I'm a poli-sci major. Most
Mhm.
people that go to law school are poli-sci majors, so you should do that." And I was like, "All right, I don't know what political science is, but I guess I'll try it. That's what everyone has to do or does to go to law school."
Mhm.
And I signed up for a bunch of those courses my first semester, and I hated all of them.
Oh
Um,
no.
and so quickly realized, that this is probably not going to be for me. But then I found out in my sophomore year that law school doesn't care about what you major in.
Mhm.
And so then I
Right.
immediately switched
Mhm.
to international studies and religious studies. And those were my majors. And so I did a lot better grade wise because I was actually enjoying the classes and the materials that I was studying. But
Mhm.
what did you major in
I
undergrad?
majored in business, so
Oh,
I wasn't the typical like poli-sci
yeah.
major either. And we definitely like you said, we accept students with all different backgrounds, music, engineering, science backgrounds, nursing. It runs the gamut because you really can practice. There's so many different types of law that you could practice. You could potentially marry your undergraduate degree with what you do after law school or not. Like either way is totally fine. But I think you touched on a really good point. You switched majors to something that you actually liked and you did better. And
Mhm.
so I definitely give that advice. Students, think about what your interests are, select a major that you are going to enjoy. because you will typically do better. You'll enjoy the material. You'll want to go to class. You'll want to study. You'll want to learn. All of that is going to help, because while law schools are not particularly concerned with what major, they are going to look at your cumulative GPA, and it is going to be an important numerical factor that's considered in the application process. So the stronger cumulative GPA that you can bring to the table, just the more, more doors that will open for you, more law schools that will be interested in you, and you'll be competitive in terms of an applicant. I also say, think about too, if you don't go to law school, like if you change your mind along the way, or you want to take a break in between, like I did, I just needed a break from school. Is it something you could have a career in? Is there something, are you gonna be able to make money? Because at the end of the day, like, we do need to make money to live. So think about that too. Like, what would you do with the degree as well if, after you graduate, you decide law school is not the path, or you want to take a break between programs?
Yeah, no, and I think that ties into what we were talking about earlier when you're reflecting about that too, just because, that it comes across, I think, at least when I'm reading a personal statement, a lot of times I can tell when it's something that the person maybe not isn't really fully committed to it. They're just kind of doing it because they majored in poli sci or in something where they're like,
Right. They're
"Yeah,
not
so
sure
what
what
I do
else
with
to
grad
do.
school." Yeah, and so I guess I'll try law school. And law school is definitely not something you want to just try out unless you
Just,
got
yeah,
that kind of money and time, which most people.
not something you want to do on a whim.
Exactly, exactly. So no, definitely. But no, yeah, grades definitely important. But something just as important, and I think, is really where I get a lot of questions from prospective students in understanding what this means, because it's very different from undergrad. But can you talk about really what rolling admissions is, and what does that mean for an applicant?
Right. So typically, rolling admissions is going to mean that we'll review applications as we receive them and they become complete. So law schools, typically, I would say applications open around September 1st, September 15th, I think are typical start times for law schools. And you can start applying on day one if you want to, and they will probably start reviewing applications shortly thereafter, after the applications open, and we'll start reviewing and making decisions. And so decisions will just be rolling out, December, January, February, as they're received. And so there are benefits to applying early. Obviously, if you apply earlier in the process, then the class is not full, right? They haven't admitted a lot of students yet. And so it's kind of like a wide open playing field. Also something to consider would be scholarships. A lot of schools will offer scholarships, many of them merit-based. And there's only so much money in that pool, in that fund. And so if you're earlier in the process, there's more money in the pot for you, potentially to receive. But I give a caveat with that as well. Obviously, applying early is beneficial, but you should apply when your application is strongest. So I don't recommend rushing through, writing your application, writing your personal statement, or particularly the LSAT. Don't rush just to be early. It would be better to be a little bit later in the process with a stronger application, as opposed to earlier in the process with a weaker application. And so you have to think about the timing. I would say you really want to start preparing probably about a year in advance of when you would actually start, in terms of studying for the LSAT, which LSAT you're going to take. There are several offered, each cycle, each year. But if you plan to take a little bit of an earlier one, let's say, for instance, I think October is one of the options, right? So you could take October. If for some reason you weren't happy with your score and you wanted to take it again, which I'm sure we'll talk about repeating the LSAT, it gives you time to take it again and still get your application in well before the deadlines. And I'm just going to go ahead and hit on it. So you can take the LSAT more than once. My advice is always to plan to take it once, study for it, commit to it, take it, so then you can just move on with your life. Studying for it is not fun. There are costs involved. So just taking it over and over again, I don't think it's good for your mental health or your wallet, right? But sometimes life happens, things happen, you get sick on the day of the exam, who knows? You can take it more than once. And for the most part, law schools are going to give primary consideration to your highest score. I think I said more than you even asked for me to say.
No, definitely. No, I appreciate all of that. And yeah, agree with all of that. You never want to take a test just to take it, because I do hear
Yeah,
that sometimes. I'm like, I just want to see where I was the
yeah.
first time. I'm like, no, you
Take a practice
every
test if you just want to see where you're
exactly.
at. Yeah, don't do
Leave the
group.
money and the time and do practice test. No, because yeah, because we see all of your scores, and if you cancel it,
Right,
we'll see that, and so then you put yourself in a position where you got to explain something that if you
right.
would have prepared, you
Hmm.
wouldn't have to worry about as much. But you kind of touched on a little bit, about the benefit of applying early, because I think that's definitely a conversation that I have often about students trying to weigh, should I prioritize applying early, even if not it's not 100% how I want it, or should I just hold off, a couple months to make sure everything's exactly how I want it and then submit it. I guess what do you recommend to students when they're trying to decide, obviously you have some that want to apply like September 1st.
Right.
You don't need to do that, but
Mhm.
when you start getting into maybe October versus
Mhm.
December or even February. I
Mhm.
know it's very school dependent when it comes to that, because for
Mhm.
us, for at Duke, the general application deadline is normally mid-February.
Mhm.
Some schools are later than that. So,
Right.
what is your recommendation when it comes to that balancing?
Yeah, it is a balance, and I think you have to be honest with yourself, particularly so you may never feel like
Mm,
your application is exactly what you want it to
yeah.
be. And I do worry about students that are just trying to reach that perfection that, you have to get to a point where you're like, you know what, this is my best,
Mm,
right? Like, especially when it comes to the LSAT, if you know you've put in the work and you've studied for it, and you kind of keep getting the same score on your practice exams, no matter what you do, you have to accept and come to the realization like this is the best I can do. Like I have given it my all, I've studied, I'm not seeing any continued improvement on my LSAT score. I need to just go for it. And that's where your research comes into. So you should apply to multiple schools. You should not just be applying to one. You want to cast somewhat of a broad net. I'm not saying apply to 20 schools, but do your research and kind of see. You'll know based on, so every law school is going to have to report their medians. So their median LSAT score and their median GPA. And you'll know what yours are. So is your LSAT and GPA close to the medians, above the medians, below the medians? I would say, pick a couple schools that maybe you're a little bit above their medians, pick a couple schools where you're right at that target, and then pick a couple schools that are, a little beyond maybe where you're at, because you never know what a law school is looking for. It's not just numbers. I know we're talking a lot about that in this beginning conversation. And it is important, but it's not decisive. Law schools are looking for different things. And so don't self-exclude. Make sure, that you're giving yourself some options. Um, but yeah, not, it's a balance between, it's hard. I think it's personal for every person, but realizing when it comes to that point where this is my best, I've given my best, I'm going to start going ahead and submitting these applications, and again, moving on with your life. You don't want to
Yeah,
get too bogged down.
definitely. No, I think that's the toughest part. It was for me for the personal statement, just because it's like, all right. You get to a point where every time you read it, you're gonna change something. It's like, all right,
Right.
like, all right, cut it,
Hmm.
and just submit it. So no, I definitely understand that part of it. For you, as far as like when there's schools vary on like the application types and whether they're doing regular decision, early decision.
Right.
Some schools offer, some schools don't.
Hmm.
Some schools early decision is binding, others is not. What
Right.
is it for Houston, and how do you, if it's binding,
Hmm.
how do you advise students make the decision of do I want to apply early decision or regular decision?
Right, right. So we do have an early decision deadline as well as a regular decision deadline. We actually have a couple different, because we also have a part-time evening program, and
Hmm.
that those deadlines are a little different for the part-time evening program. But our early decision is non-binding. So if you apply early and you're accepted early, that does not mean you have to come to the University of Houston. You still have options to go to other places. But if you do apply to a school that's binding, you definitely want to understand what that means. And typically what it's going to mean is if you are admitted to the program, then there is the expectation that you are going to attend that program and you're going to withdraw your application from all other institutions. So my advice with any sort of binding admissions, typically, if it is binding, there's some benefit to the applicant. So they may you may have a higher chance of being admitted if you do the early decision binding. But my advice is going to be, you better be 110% sure that's the law school that you want to go to, because you're going to then eliminate all your other options, no matter how good the school is, no matter how much scholarship money the other schools give you. You are committing that, you know, you're not going to go anywhere else. So you need to be 110% committed. And that definitely does work well for some students. I would say if you know, let's say, you know, whatever city that school's in, that's where you want to stay, that's where your family is, that's where you live. Or for a student who has maybe children already, or a spouse with a job in that city, and you're like, I'm not leaving, no matter where I get into law school, like I need to be in this location. That would work well for someone like in a situation like that.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's something that I tell students, because our early decision is binding, and so I tell students limited to top two choices. I would say like that's really the school I want, because you are committing. And for us, in most schools that have the binding decisions, you're having to accept that offer and pay a deposit
Hmm.
before you often even know your scholarship offer.
Hmm.
Just because at least the way that we do it at Duke, we have scholarship interviews, so we don't do those until the spring. And so if you were part of the first round of the early decision, because we have
Hmm.
2 rounds, you'll get your decision by the end of December. And so once you get an admission decision as an early decision applicant, you have we think we give 2 weeks
Wow.
from receiving the decision to pay the deposit. And so, you're committing and you're paying money before you even know how much scholarship
Right.
you're getting offered. So that's the big consideration that I advise students is, yes, you get the benefit of you're applying early. Maybe if your number is a little bit weaker, we tend to be a little bit more lenient on that side of
Mhm.
things when it comes to the application, because we know if we admit this person, they're committing to us. So it's not as big of a chance as, for example, a regular decision applicant that we may admit and they may not end up coming here, or that we may admit they may not choose to come here. And so that's kind of the benefit of it, but it is definitely a drawback. And I tell students, if the financial aid aspect is going to be the biggest or one of the biggest
Mhm.
components in your decision, then you have to really think about, am I comfortable with this school or whatever schools that you're doing that with, committing to them without actually knowing my scholarship offer.
Right.
Because we'll get to the whole financial aid process later,
Mhm.
but it also limits you on your opportunities to request a appeal or reconsideration of your initial scholarship offer as well. So that's just something to think about when you're
That's
going
good to
through
know.
that
I didn't
process.
know that. I learned
Yeah,
something new.
yeah, there you
I didn't think
go.
about the scholarship side and when notification of that would come. Mhm.
Yes, and every school does it differently, so that's just
Right.
we do it at Duke. But yeah, definitely, those are questions to ask admissions people, because that's what we're here for. So feel free to reach out to us.
Mhm.
And if you're trying to make this decision or trying to figure out what's the difference, definitely feel free to ask the admissions representatives or the schools that you're interested in. A word that applicants are going to hear a ton of throughout this series and just in general in law school admissions process, if they ever go to any kind of info session. And there's one of the few times that I'm comfortable speaking in generalities and that applies to any law school is the word holistic review.
Yes.
And so,
Holistic and comprehensive.
what does that mean? Because
So,
now I
right.
kind of know, I mostly know when I explain it, but as an applicant, I had no idea what that meant. So how do you explain it?
Right. And so I touched on it a little bit earlier, right? When I said, of course, LSAT and cumulative GPA are very important. Those are the numerical factors we'll consider, but they are not decisive. And so that's where the holistic review comes in. So everything that you submit in your application will be taken into consideration. I would say personal statement ranks very high amongst the things that we will consider and look at. So again, it's an opportunity for us to learn about you, but it's also a writing sample. So we're seeing, your writing skills. And it's basically, like I said, with the exception of schools that do some sort of interview process, it's the only opportunity that we have to actually hear your voice, where you're coming from, what your desires are, your ambitions. So it's really important. The personal statement, I would say, is something you should spend a significant amount of time on. We are okay, and I think most law schools are okay with allowing others to proofread your personal statement to help you, refine it, polish it, make sure there's no grammatical errors, spelling errors. I recommend having someone that knows you really well review your personal statement, but then also have someone that doesn't know you very well, because that's the position that we'll be in as admissions professionals. We don't know you. And so if you have someone read it that doesn't know you well and they don't really understand where you're coming from or what it is that you want to do, that's probably how we're going to feel too. So that's where that, having other people take a look at it can be helpful. And then the resume and the letters of recommendation. So those are the main components, and all of that will be read, all of that will be looked at. Every single application, no matter what law school you apply to, is going to be read. I know sometimes there's like these rumors that like, we don't really read them, or we just look at, absolutely not true. We read every single thing that you submit. And the letters of recommendation will give us an idea of how other people view you. And so different law schools will have different advice in terms of who should be writing those letters for you, but definitely the generalizations would be someone that knows you well, someone that is going to be able to write a positive letter of recommendation about you. I think it's good general advice. If you're coming straight from undergrad, at least one of those letters is from a professor. You should have a relationship with one of your professors that you can go to that can speak about you academically and your work ethic as a student. And then beyond that, I mean, it's going to vary between law schools, but for the most part, I would say then you could have a professional one, a work experience supervisor, someone you've worked for. But those will give us, like I said, perspective and insight about you from someone else, either in an academic setting or a professional setting. And again, I think I can safely say for all law schools, they're not going to want to see letters from family members. Mom and dad love you, grandma loves you, uncle, aunt, like everybody's going to say amazing things about you. So that's not super helpful. I would say the only exception would be if you actually worked for someone in your family, like in a very professional capacity, then they can talk about you in that regard. But the letters that we receive that talk about like, I've known Sam since he was 5 and he's such a good kid and he was like really involved in football in high school. It's like, it's not helpful to us. Yeah. It's not going to be it's not the impact you want to have in law school admissions. So holistic means we'll look at all of that, and we'll look at the experience you have on your resume, leadership roles that you may have served in. If you've worked a lot in undergrad to help support yourself through, then we definitely won't have an expectation of seeing a lot of extracurricular activities, if you were working significantly. But if not, then we do like to see, okay, well, were they involved in any student organizations, leadership, volunteer work, that kind of thing. I think we're all looking as well for a well-rounded person. So that's what I would say about holistic. So again, don't self-exclude if your numbers aren't quite what the school is looking for, because they're going to look at all these other factors as well.
Exactly. And that's the biggest thing that I tell students too is, if you're slightly lower or a little bit lower, it's okay, still apply. Don't self-exclude and let us tell you no. Because you never know, we might say yes. But at the same time, on the flip side of that, don't assume if you're above the school's 75th percentile in both numbers that you're guaranteed admission. Nothing's guaranteed in law
Right.
school admission.
Nothing.
There's plenty of times where I've read, people with 180s, 4.0s, and I read the personal statement and it's clear that they just didn't put any effort into it. They were really relying on those numbers, and we have zero problems waitlisting or denying those
Right.
applicants too.
Right.
And so, that's something that you never want to make those assumptions when it comes to that side of things, because we really do consider everything. Of course, I think numbers, personal statement are probably going to be the biggest when it comes to influence, and then everything else kind of complements. But everything else is still being considered, because that's something that I tell students is, holistic doesn't mean everything's equal. I think the main things
Right.
are going to be the numbers and the personal statement and any other required essays that a school may have, especially this year that a lot of schools are reformatting their structure of their application when it comes to statements. So for example, with us, now we have a required short answer section where we used to have 2 optional essays. Now we only have 1 optional. And so, you want to be mindful of those things and really, invest the time in those, because that can overcome the lower numbers or it can sink higher numbers. So just be mindful of that. I talked a little bit about earlier as far as Duke goes. We only do scholarship interviews. We don't do general admissions interviews. But I know some schools do. Pilar, does Houston do admissions interviews?
No, we don't.
Yeah, what I've heard though lately is some schools are considering doing, or they've done them in the past. Some schools have done it in the past, but more schools are considering doing optional like recorded videos
Right.
to
Yeah.
do. And
Right.
so that's the thing, as part of, you know, as the definition of holistic changes, then we're trying to figure out how can we make sure that we're being
Mhm.
as inclusive as we possibly can. You're gonna see different things pop up year to year, and I think this year we'll probably see more of that when it comes to admissions interviews. But I would definitely ask uh,
Right.
that as well. I guess something that it just made me think of because I get this asked often is if someone visits a campus. You mentioned earlier as one of the recommendations as someone's trying to figure out if this is for me. Does that for you all give them like an advantage over like, oh, they know me, they know me, I visited the campus. Does it affect it in any kind of way? Because it doesn't really for us, but I know for
No, I would say it doesn't really for us either. I would only say it could potentially, I guess, have a negative impact if someone came and was very, rude or
yeah,
disruptive to, the school, possibly, but I mean, that's never happened. And so I
yeah.
would say no. But in speaking about visiting, I would say as you're thinking about law schools and visiting, definitely look on their website, see if they have opportunities to visit, make an appointment.
Mm,
If you really want to have a good whole, experience of the law school, definitely make an appointment, see what you can schedule. Tours, class visits, meeting with admissions professionals. A lot of times, the tours will be offered by current students, so it's an opportunity to talk to them. So if you make an appointment and you schedule all of that, it'll be much more, beneficial than just trying to walk into an admissions office, particularly since like the fall semester, we're traveling, we're
mhm,
recruiting. There's times when there really isn't, I mean, there may be a support staff in the office. But if you wanted to actually meet and talk about the admissions process, there may not even be someone in the office the day that you come in. So scheduling that is definitely something you should do. Just like you would if you were going to the doctor. You're not just gonna walk in. You're gonna make
Yeah,
an
no, that's
appointment.
something that surprised me this past couple of years now that I've been at Duke. Is sometimes we'll have students that just fly in from a different part of the country to visit and walk and assume they will be here, especially
Um,
fall. If you want to have a conversation with us, we'll do our best to
right.
accommodate you. But there may be times, like Pilar said, we're not here or we got a lot going on.
We have,
And
we have meetings,
yeah,
different
so
departments, different
definitely,
administrators. We're always
definitely.
working on something else. So
Yeah, so
yeah,
definitely.
unfortunately, we're not just hanging out waiting for people to show up. I wish.
Exactly. Yeah, I wish. No, because as much as I enjoy speaking to people, unfortunately, we got to do all these other things as well. But
Mhm,
yeah, no. So definitely to maximize your visit, definitely reach out to us
mhm.
first,
Yeah,
or our offices so we can schedule
right.
something. And that way we
And
can
that,
prepare too, because we often do student-led tours.
mhm,
Obviously we talked about class observations as well, and or if there's a specific area of law that you're interested in, we can also set up meeting with professors because a lot of our
mhm.
professors like to speak to applicants sometimes. So we're always happy to do that as well. So you can't necessarily do that as much if you just walk in.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Did you have
One thing
anything
I
else?
thought about when you were speaking earlier, and I wanted to throw in real quick, we've been talking about medians, median LSAT, median GPA, and not self-excluding. And remember that the median is the middle. So there's
Mhm.
students above the medians and there's students below the medians in each entering class. And there's some students that will have maybe one numerical factor that's above the median
Mhm.
and the other one is below. So they may have a high GPA, but their LSAT might not quite be at the median. And so it's, every student is different and it's a different mix for each one. So again, it's just those numbers just give you an idea
Mhm.
and it's something tangible that we're able to report because the
Yeah.
other subjective things that we look at in terms of your resume, personal statement, letter of recommendation, we can't quantify those things. So unfortunately, it's not something that we can, publish, but the LSAT and GPA
Yeah.
just gives you an idea.
Yeah. No, someone asked me, they're like, how do you like, what makes you want to admit, like, if all the numbers are the same, what makes you want to admit some students and not admit others or waitlist others? And I'm like, sometimes it's just a vibe check
Mhm,
that you kind of get from the application as
mhm.
you're reading through everything, and like you said, it's not something that you can specifically quantify. But definitely use those mediums as guideposts and not dictators, is I think the
Right.
main
I like that.
takeaway from
Guideposts,
them. And
not dictators. I'm gonna start using that.
all right, go ahead.
I'm gonna steal
I'll
that
give
from
you
you.
permission on the record. But yeah, no, I mean, and that's, I think, because a lot of people think I'm like, it's a cutoff. And that's something that I get asked often is like, oh, this median is the minimum LSAT or the minimum GPA that I have to get admitted. And it's
Mhm.
exactly what you said, that's half the midpoint. Half the class is at or above that, half the class at or below that. And that
Mhm.
window can range widely. And
Right,
so,
right.
definitely, just use those as guideposts. But yeah, so you know, this can vary school to school as well. I mentioned earlier with early decision, we guarantee for you to have a decision by a certain date.
Mhm.
If you decide to apply to early decision, but generally speaking, I mean, I know you can only speak to Houston, and I can talk a
Mhm.
little bit about Duke. But how long does it take for an applicant to receive a decision? Does the timing of when they apply affect the duration of the time they're going to have to wait?
That's a good question. Not so much, I would say, really the duration, but of course, the earlier you apply, the earlier you'll know because
Yeah.
we'll read your application first. But I would say general kind of like mark points in the timeline would be our early decision is November 15th. So if you have your application in by November 15th, then you would know your answer no later than February. But typically we can get you a decision much earlier than that. We just like to give ourselves that leeway.
Yeah.
And then if you're applying regular decision, which the deadline is March 15th, then we say you would know no later than May. But
Okay.
again, if we've been able to get through a lot of applications, we try to get them out, as efficiently as possible while reading every page and as efficiently as possible.
Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
and that's why it's important to pay attention to page limits,
Mhm.
because that makes our lives a lot easier since we have to
Mhm.
read all of them.
Right.
But yeah, no, for Duke, if you're applying regular decision, it can have an impact on how quickly you find out, just because we start out, but we get such a high volume of applications
Mhm.
earlier. So if you apply September, October, normally, 2, 3 months,
Right.
I think is a normal window versus
Mhm.
January, February, when we get a even larger amount that's building on that initial volume, then it tends to be a little bit longer that you're having to wait. So for example, this year, we're getting to January applicants in about end of March, beginning of April. And so that's for the initial review. And so then it goes to the different levels. So that's the way that applications are reviewed vary from school to school as well. So some school it's just admission staff, others include faculty, others include students. And so for us, it's just the admission staff. And so it just goes through different layers
Mm.
of the review process, and so that can take time as well. And
Right.
so we do our best, and we've been able to these past couple of years to give everyone a decision that applied by our deadline, by the deposit deadline, and
Mhm.
that's the goal. But it
Right.
can be delayed based on that side of things, and especially obviously that also delays if you're admitted the scholarship offer and when you receive that information as
Mhm.
well. Bilal, how do you guys do your application review
Right.
process?
So we do have a process that involves faculty. So like you
Mm,
said, that takes, that makes it take a little bit longer. But it's read by admissions staff first and
mm,
then goes to the faculty. Um, so I would say schools will usually, like, on our website, and even in the application instructions itself, it'll tell you like this is when you can expect to receive,
mm,
no later than this date, is when you should
mm,
expect to receive a decision. So pay attention to those things when you're applying to different schools. Be realistic and reasonable on the turnaround time, because it is a little bit frustrating when I have an applicant apply and a week later they're emailing me, when are they going to get a decision? I'm like,
mhm.
it's only been a week. Like, do you know how many people were, ahead of you that we're looking at? So be respectful, be reasonable, look at what they tell you their deadlines are. Now, I will be honest, every once in a while there's a mistake, right? Somehow, some way, someone's decision doesn't go out for some reason or another. So if it has been a significant period of time and you feel like I haven't gotten I haven't heard anything, or sometimes decisions will get be pushed into junk mail and students won't see it.
Mm,
So, it's been a significant amount of time and it's beyond what we said we would give you. Please reach out respectfully because we want
mhm.
to make sure you have your decision.
Yeah,
But yeah, don't apply and then a week or two later expect a decision and start calling our office and emailing our office, where's my decision? Because
yeah,
it's just not reasonable.
yeah. And that made me think of also, you don't have to email every single person listed on the website in the department.
Yes.
Do we have
Yes.
a general admissions email? Feel
Yes.
free to
So
email
do
that.
we. So do we.
Then you'll
Absolutely.
end up with 5 responses, or what we'll usually do is I'll usually forward it to our general admissions if it's someone that I haven't spoken to before directly,
Mhm.
and it's just like a general, "Can you give me an update on my application?" So that way our staff member that can give you that information can do that. But sometimes she'll tell us like, "Hey, I just got emails from all of you about the same person and it's the
Mhm.
exact same email." So
Mhm.
just, just send the one email. We don't need the
Right,
entire
right.
staff to know.
And one thing too, I think a lot of law schools I know that we do, you can check your status online.
Mhm, mhm,
So when you apply to our school, you'll receive an email confirming that we've received your application, and it'll include information on how you can log into the online status checker through LSAC. So that's another, avenue you can go in there and
yeah,
check, and see where you are in the process without reaching out to admissions offices. So in that instance, like if it says a decision is rendered, but you haven't gotten anything, then, oh,
yeah,
I need to reach out because it says it's
exactly.
done, but I haven't received anything.
Mhm,
But yes, definitely emailing everybody in the office. Sometimes too, I feel like it doesn't put the applicant in the best light
mhm,
because particularly depending on what it is that they're asking, sometimes I feel they're doing that because they don't like the answer that someone else gave them in the
yeah,
office, right? So if they're
yeah,
asking something and we've answered it and the answer is no, and they don't like that, no to whatever the question is, not necessarily being admitted,
yeah,
whatever it is. So then they say, oh, well, let me try somebody else in the office. Like, let me try everyone and see if I can get to the answer that I want. And
mhm,
I don't care for that.
yeah,
So be careful
yeah.
with emailing everybody in the office. Just
Yeah,
pick
and that's the thing, like,
one,
most
or like
schools.
you said, pick the
Yeah,
general one. I think the
yeah,
general one is the best way to go because depending on what you're asking for, it'll then
mm,
get sent to the right person to answer your question.
exactly.
For instance,
Yeah,
if you're asking a very specific question about financial aid, I
mhm,
wouldn't even be the person to answer that for you. We have a
mhm,
financial aid advisor who is the expert that I would send that email to because I don't want to give out the wrong
yeah,
information.
yeah,
So again, depending on what you're asking, like we have someone that's dedicated to help students that are interested in transferring. So if you had a
mhm.
transfer related question, it would go to someone else. So that general email is the best.
Exactly. No, definitely. But yeah, no, that's the thing. Like I was gonna say, we're usually not that big of a staff. Like, some schools have really big staffs.
Mhm.
Most don't. So we talk to each other, and so we'll say,
Absolutely.
hey, so
Hmm.
so email me or so email me too. Or sometimes if it's a very specific question, and I'm not 100% sure, I'll ask my dean, like, hey, how do you normally answer this? I'm like, oh, that person emailed me too last week.
Hmm. Hmm.
And
Yeah.
so definitely be mindful that
Yeah.
we talk to each other.
Right. You're creating more work for all of us because then we're all
Exactly.
trying to find the answer and
Yeah, and
yeah.
then we remember you for the wrong reasons.
Right. Right.
So be mindful of that for sure. You talked about earlier, Houston has a part-time program.
Mhm.
Um, Obviously, timing wise, the application process can be different for that too.
It's a little different,
Yeah, how does
because
that work for
yeah,
you?
in our minds, we give a little bit longer to apply because we're thinking these are probably students or prospective students that are working already. And so with keeping in mind that you're busy with work,
Mm-hmm.
and typically again, the part-time program are students that are a little bit older, may have families, they just have more going on. So we try to give them a little bit more
Yeah.
time. The early decision deadline is the same, that November 15th, but we give our part-time applicants until May 15th for that regular decision. And the part-time program, that is something unique, I think, to U of H. Not every law school has a part-time program, but it allows students to work during the day and then take their classes in the evening. So it is a part-time evening program
Mm,
exclusively the first year, Monday through Thursday, classes starting at 6 p.m. till about 9 p.m. After the first year, then students have the autonomy to pick whatever classes they want. So if they have the flexibility in their schedules to take classes during the day, they can, or if they'd like to stay in the evening, in the evening classes, that's fine too. But you'll find as well in thinking about classes, your first year, your classes will be picked for you by the law schools. And then after the first year is when you can start selecting the courses that you're interested in. But typically, I think that first year, you are meeting most not all, but most of their required courses that first year. And those classes are selected for you. So you don't have to worry about registering for courses that first year, that summer before law school. We will take care of that for you.
Yeah, no, that's something that so Duke doesn't have a part-time program, but where I worked prior to Duke, where I worked at Campbell Law School, we did have a day part-time program.
Mm.
So we would often refer them to North Carolina Central Law School here locally if they were looking for an evening program.
Mhm.
So, there's various types of part-time programs. There's now a couple or a few
Yeah,
online
there's a couple
programs.
online now.
Yeah, so we have
Yeah.
Syracuse, Mitchell Hemline, and St. Mary's.
St. Mary's. Yeah.
Those are the three I know of. I don't know if
You
you
know what? I think South Texas has,
South Texas.
I
Okay.
don't know that it's fully online.
Yeah.
Don't quote me.
Yeah.
I don't think it's fully online, but I think it's mostly.
Yeah. And yeah,
Y-
and Syracuse is the same way. You have to usually go in at the beginning of the semester for a certain amount of time, and then
mhm,
the rest of it is online
yeah.
as well. So,
Yeah.
whatever you're looking for, depending on your fit, or whatever is, your life situation is. So for example, I have a friend that she's doing Syracuse's online program because her spouse is in the military and they're constantly moving. So she couldn't
Moving.
really
Yeah.
commit to something that was in person,
Mhm.
even part-time. But I guess, part-time program, what are the more typical stories or experiences that students have that choose to do your part-time program?
Like I said, they're working already,
Mhm.
so this may be a second career, or they have, families, and so they can't just necessarily quit their jobs and not have any sort of income.
Yeah.
And so ours is exclusively in person. It is in the evening, like I said, and it takes typically 4 years to complete. And it is year round. So it's
Okay.
classes in the fall, classes in the spring, and then just a couple classes in the summer.
I got you.
One nice thing with our program too, there's a lot of flexibility. Like I said, after the first year, you pick your courses. If you're a full-time student, you want to take some night classes, you can. If you're an evening student, you want to take some day classes, you can. But also you can switch programs. So if you
Mhm.
started in the part-time program, it doesn't mean you're stuck there the whole time. If you decide at some point, you know what, I want to finish, I want to finish a little bit faster, you can
Yeah.
switch to the full-time after the first year, and vice versa, full-time to part-time. If you realize, you know what, I need to work, you can switch from full-time to part-time. So there's a lot of movement
Yeah.
there. But yeah, they're usually working already.
Yeah,
Usually.
that was gonna be one of my questions if they could switch, because I know sometimes, or a lot of times, the big concern for a lot of first year students is, for the first time, maybe for some of them, they won't get to work while they're in school.
Mhm, mhm.
Um, for most schools, your first year, they're gonna
Right.
have that ban of you can't work at all.
Or
Um,
strongly recommend that you don't.
yeah.
Yeah, strongly recommend that you don't.
Yeah. So for
I
us,
know, and I have a lot of students, and maybe you experience this too. They're like, but I worked in undergrad.
exactly, yeah.
And I'm like, I know, I understand that. I did too. But
Yeah.
I promise you it's different. It's
Yeah.
different. And that first year can have a big impact, on the remaining time. Like a lot of things are based on grades, like internship
Mhm.
opportunities, um, journals. So, being a part of the journals are a lot of times based on grades. So that first year, you really just need to focus on classes,
Yeah.
dedicate your time to that. And then after that, I would say there's more flexibility and there's
Yeah.
some room to maybe work a little bit. And then definitely in the summers, we're going to
Mhm.
encourage you to
Mhm.
work and get
Yeah.
practical experience. And I don't know if that's a part of your curriculum. It's not at U of H. They don't have to do internships in the
Mhm.
summertime, but again, it's strongly recommended. Um, there's a certain number of hours that we require, like practical skills courses,
Okay.
but they can do those in-house or they can use an internship for that as well.
Yeah.
But they don't have to, but again, strongly encouraged, because at the end of the day, if you're looking at, okay, I'm about to graduate law school and you have two applicants with, similar backgrounds, similar GPAs, but one did a whole bunch of legal experience and the other one didn't. I
Mhm.
mean, most likely they're going to pick the one that already has the
Yeah.
experience. So
Yeah.
definitely encourage you, at least in the summers, to get some practical experience.
Yeah. No, we
And it
don't.
helps
Yeah, go
you
ahead.
determine,
Yeah.
maybe what kind of law you want to
Mhm.
practice.
Yeah, we don't require it either, and that's exactly what I tell students is that first summer is really the main summer where if you're really not sure and uncertain of what area of law you want to pursue, that's where you tend to have the most flexibility as far as exploring different areas of law, maybe different geographic locations, different office settings, because some people, think, oh, big law firm environments where I want to be, get there. hate it and you're like, you know what, I think I'm okay with something smaller,
Right.
where I'm gonna have a little bit more work-life balance probably.
Mhm.
But some people, thrive in that environment. So that first summer is definitely where you have the most flexibility. Some students choose to not do anything law related, but that's pretty much the last summer that you can do that because the second summer is normally, at least for our students, now you're going into places that you're probably gonna be looking for job opportunities in those locations or
Right.
at those firms immediately after law school for that first job after law school. So
Right.
there's a little bit more demand on that second summer than the first. But yeah, no, the no work rule for first years is really protecting you from yourself. Because
Right.
most people that go to law school, they were overachievers or they
Right. Very
wanted to do a lot,
ambitious.
or we had to work while we were in undergrad, and so we're just used to doing a lot and not sitting still. But unfortunately, part of the process, especially that first semester of law school, you need to sit still and focus on learning this new way of thinking, this new way of writing that just can't be sped up, and it takes time, and you need to commit that time to it. So that's really the main reason why we have those policies for those first years, especially in the first semester. But to kind of end and conclude where we're at
Sure.
the conversation,
Mhm.
what is your advice, Pilar, for students that are, starting this process or in the middle of this process or thinking about starting this process to on how to navigate everything? Because like we mentioned in the beginning, there's so many sources of information that it can be overwhelming. So what's your piece
Mhm.
of advice for them?
My first thought is like, stay off the blogs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, one is, admissions professionals, we are here as a resource. And I think you'll find like we are not salespeople. At least I am not a salesperson.
Yeah.
Like I am not going to push, U of H on you.
Mhm.
If you come and you visit and you ask me questions, like I'm going to answer them as honestly as I can. But at the end of the day, I think we all work together. We're very collegial environment, and we want you to go to the law school where you're going to be happy, you're going to be successful, and ultimately become a happy alumni who wants to come back and give to the law school your time and or your money. So, we want you to be happy. So we're not going to just try to sell you a dream and then you're going to hate it
Yeah.
once you get there. So
Yeah.
definitely reaching out to our offices, asking the questions to the professionals who really know what they're talking about, as opposed to the blogs, is going to be more helpful to you. Because if you haven't gone on them already or not, I mean, students are talking about all kinds of things, and a lot of the information is inaccurate. People are misinformed, and it starts a rumor mill. It's just, yeah, it can be an ugly place. So I would
Conspiracy
say be
theories, all
careful
this
of
stuff.
that,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
I think there's nothing more important than visiting the law school you think you
Mhm.
may attend. And I recognize that there may be costs involved with that, depending, if you're thinking about going to law school in another state. Um, and so you don't necessarily need to visit at the point of application, but I would say once admitted to the program and it's really a genuine option for you, try to visit the schools that you think you really will go to, because getting the vibe, getting the feel, meeting the people, being in the environment, and being able to just like listen to your gut, if this is somewhere you think you're going to be happy for the next 3 or 4 years if you go part-time, is something that just can't be replaced. As much as we try to offer resources via email on our website and videos and things like this, which are extremely helpful, I
Mhm.
think going and being in the space, is going to help you make that decision. And then I also like to give advice like once you become a student.
Mhm.
So uh, enjoy that last summer before you go to law school. Have some fun, go on a vacation, because it is going to be really hard. You're going to hit the ground running from day one. Even before that, most law schools, they're going to expect you have read before the first day of
Mhm.
class.
Mhm.
So enjoy that summer and then be ready to work once you start that first day. It's very easy to get behind, and law school is a different animal than undergrad. In undergrad, if you took a couple days off, didn't do your work, you could cram over the weekend, study all weekend, catch up, and be fine. And I just don't really think that's possible in law school. You need to really stay on top of your reading, do your reading so you can be prepared for class, so you can get the most out of it, and then utilize the resources that are there at your law school. And that's the staff. So you have, no matter where you go, you're going to have obviously professors, they're going to have office hours, there's possibly student TAs available as well. Go to them with questions when you don't understand something. Don't wait until the end of the semester. Don't wait until finals. If you have an issue, you're not understanding something, nip it in the bud right away. Don't be afraid to go and talk to them. They want to help you. They want you to be successful. And then your student affairs office, as well as your career development office in terms of jobs and internships and things like that. They're there to help you. They're a resource. At least give them the chance to try to help you. Because I think it's invaluable, and the students that take advantage of that see the benefits to it, even if you aren't necessarily at the very top of the class, right? Like you're not in the top 20% or whatever. The career office is still going to help you to find, significant, meaningful internships that are available to you. So yeah, utilizing the resources within your law center or law school and being ready to work hard. Those are my once you
no, I
cross
mean,
over into the student.
for
So,
sure. No, I would tell all my current students, I'm like, listen, you're paying for it. Might as well take advantage of these
yes.
resources. So,
Mhm.
why are you gonna go, pay for something that you're never gonna use and that could benefit you? So,
Mm.
take advantage of those for sure. And no, and I always appreciate when others say that we're not salespeople, because sometimes I feel like applicants think that we are, that we're gonna do everything we can to sell you on our side.
Right. Yeah.
And
Like
no, I
that's
don't
the
get paid
last thing I
commission.
want to do. I am not a salesperson. That is the last thing I want to do. I'm
Yeah,
just going to tell you what we have and what we
yeah.
offer. And if it's a good fit for you, that's wonderful. Love to have you. And if it's not, that's okay
Mhm.
too.
Exactly. And most of us wanted to come into this profession because we want to help students that were in similar
Right.
positions make those, big life altering decisions of like where you're going to live for 3 years, where you're going to go to school, the
Mhm.
impact that it's going to have moving forward. And, like I said, we don't get paid commission based on how many people we bring on. Then I'd be making a lot more money. But, so
No.
that's why our focus is what is the best fit for you and where you're going to be the happiest. And if it's here, great. And if not, it's okay, and we wish you the best where you will be happy.
Right.
Usually we know the admissions team there, so we can connect you. And so that's something that I'm always happy to do as well. But no, thank you, Pilar, for your time. I appreciate
Absolutely.
all of your advice and your information, and thank you.
It's been fun talking.